people act in accordance with the truth as they believe it to be, which only reinforced this idea that I always thought I was in the business of bringing data to the table, and the data was quote unquote the truth. I'm really in the belief changing business. Like, how do I get this person to believe that this is in some way, shape better than what their beliefs are today? And that's a very, very tough thing to do. So it's not necessarily about bringing more data into the specific example. It's more about creating a foundation for that conversation to happen, so that you can get past some of the, I don't really understand why this optimization solution is better, but I know Vijay is a good guy. I trust Vijay. That's why I'm going to do it, not because the math is right. Behaviors do not change unless beliefs change.
Welcome to another episode of the Decision Intelligence Lab podcast. I'm your host, Vijay Mehrotra. I'm here with my co-host, Michael Watson. And today's guest is Zahir Balaporia, who's had a long and illustrious career in bringing intelligent solutions to enhance decision-making by humans rather than to replace it. He's been an independent consultant doing a lot of interesting things for the last 2.5 years. And prior to that, he'd spent 6 years in software sales and solutions consulting with FICO, and over 19 years at Schneider in a bunch of different roles, including director of analytics, where he was really trying to drive adoption of analytics across logistics and supply chain in a world that hasn't been computer, software, or math-centric. And a lot of lessons learned from all of these experiences that he's going to share with us today. Zahir, welcome to the podcast. And to just get us started, you've talked a lot about kind of getting the information value chain all the way to value. And you've introduced a couple of terms, the last mile and the extra mile. Can you kind of provide your sense of what you mean by those terms and within the context of this value chain?
Totally. First of all, thanks a lot for having me on. It's been great. I've listened to the other podcasts you've already put out there. It's been a great series. So super excited to be part of this. Yeah, so the whole idea of the last mile, extra mile, I mean, most of my work has been in supply chain. And last mile problems in supply chain are obviously, very sort of well understood or thought about. And as I did a little bit of reading on the whole last mile problem, I think it comes originally from the days of electrification, or maybe even when we were putting telephone lines in. And you could think about sort of the, the base infrastructure in terms of the core networks and putting up all of that as being critical. But at the same point in time, connecting all those last dots, it doesn't really work unless we're all connected, right? So as I thought about from a supply chain perspective, and I thought about the solutions we were developing in analytics, we still had this last mile problem where, sure, I could build a model and have it running on my desktop, whatever, have some sample data sets, and it would work and say, yeah, this is great, let's deploy this. But there was this last mile problem where you had to get it deployed, right? Where you had to have an interface, people could interact with the model usually, especially if you were doing something where you wanted it in more sort of real time or near real time sort of activity on a decision somebody was trying to make, versus a strategic model where, sure, you could put up a PowerPoint and people could talk about it. So as we're looking at more real time, near real time decision support systems, the last mile problem became very critical in terms of how do we get these deployed in production. And there's been a lot of good conversations on that, a lot of great technology on that. It's one of the reasons I actually took that jump to FICO, because FICO had a really great solution there, and had a lot of fun, taking that solution to a lot of folks in the industry to get that last mile problem of deploying solutions out there. That being said, though, then there are also many examples where you could have it all there, but then people didn't use it, right? And you had to therefore, so then I was sort of the natural extension. I like playing with words. So the natural extension then was like, well, I guess I got to go the extra mile now, right? Because I got the last mile covered, but now what? So that's where sort of the extra mile problem came from. And that has almost nothing to do with technology, well, pretty much nothing to do with technology. You would need to understand kind of the context of how the technology fits into what we're working on. But it was all about, a whole variety of other things, everything from good old like build trust and, top-down leadership and all that stuff. But that's really where that whole idea of going the extra mile came from. And over time, as the last mile solutions have become better and better, it's easier and easier to get stuff out there. I've really shifted over to focusing so much more on sort of going that extra mile, and trying to figure out, what else can we do to get these solutions to get more sticky.
I think one thing you've done with that extra mile is you've started looked at politics too, and started thinking like people have to think about organizational politics. You talk a little bit about sort of how you came up with that idea and sort of what it means at a high level.
Like I said, I like playing with words. So the politics of analytics seem to flow kind of well, right? I'm an amateur musician, so I've got songs about that. We can talk about that later. But no, I'm just kidding. So it's politics, and I think generally people sort of have a negative reaction to the term politics, and I understand that, especially in today's world, or maybe it's always been that way. So the idea with the politics of analytics is, to some extent, I did want it to get a little edgy, right? To get your attention. But at the same point in time, politics fundamentally is about power, right? And how power is kind of played out in a variety of different, circumstances, constituencies, things like that. And I found more and more that in its simplest way, right? I mean, we all talk about like people get concerned, like, oh no, you brought this model and it's going to replace my job, right? Fundamentally, that's a power question, right? Like you have the power over my job, right? Type of situation, which may or may not be the case, but that it's those types of ideas. And I think the term politics in general, therefore, fits well because politics is not all bad. I mean, it's about people trying to work together in its best sense. People trying to work together to figure out a solution to something that's very, very complex. But it gets political because you have interests and I have interests, and those interests may not align. So then we may make trade-offs and we compromise on things. So in that sense, I think the politics of analytics seem to work well. And I started to think about what are the political things that tend to play out in those types of situations that it would be useful to keep in mind. And I learned a lot of these sort of the hard way, and sort of putting those down in sort of more in terms of reflection to say, okay, if I had to come up with 5 or 7 things, what would those things be?
So let's sort of, you say that you learned the hard way, so you've kind of teed up my next question so nicely. And that is, can you talk about a situation where a technically solid solution failed to create value because of the politics?
Yeah.
I know these are always painful questions. These are always painful recollections.
I've blanked all of these out of my memory, Vijay. I have to go back and think about these. There are so many interesting examples to pick from, and I kind of anticipated we'd be talking about this. So I was trying to figure out like which one would I pick, and rather than answer it with one, I think we could have a little bit of a portfolio of examples.
Excellent.
The first one is, it's very obvious, but this is 20 years ago, but it still sticks in my memory. Somebody had developed I think it was a scheduling solution, like a staff scheduling solution, more for like a customer service floor. And we were using a genetic algorithm to solve the problem. There was no like optimal solution, right? You just want a better solution to what we're doing, and the GA seemed to work well. So we were presenting to a group, and it's customer service, and I don't know maybe where I work, but there was largely women in the audience, customer service leaders. And then this gentleman was presenting the solution, and he started getting into, the details of genetic algorithms. And I'm sitting in the back thinking like, man, I don't think they really care, right? They just show them the solution, right? They don't care what methodology we used. It got better from that point forward because he went even deeper and talked about how GAs kind of, spawn these multiple solutions and fitness and things like that. And then I think he even brought up the point of, there's these child solutions that get killed. And I'm like, you can't be talking about killing children, This was a very bad way to present a solution. So that one, it didn't go very far, and there may have been other factors too, but it was a perfect example of how you communicate something, and really what you want to communicate is super, super important. In another example, we were working on the solution, and it was a supply chain network strategy solution. This was actually in the UK, and it was really interesting for me for the first time working sort of deeply, I was in the UK working with this team, and the culture there in this team and that company was quite different. I'd worked with the same company in the US, and they're much more direct over there. And initially you feel like, wait a minute, are these guys like getting along or not? But then, after you're done and you're all at the bar drinking beers together. So it's just the method of communication was kind of different. And we were presenting the solution, and the guy sitting next to me, who I'd been primarily working with the solution on, was, kind of the proponent of the solution. So he and I were kind of on the same page about, this looks good from the network design perspective. We were presenting to the director of logistics, and he was the one providing all the data, and this solution was sort of being done to him, if you understand what I mean, yes. Right? So he was like, no, that will never work, and blah, blah, blah. And here I am. And it was early, so they're like, check the data, right, type of stuff. So I've got this laundry list of things that I'm worried about. I was like, no, the model's wrong. Finally, we hit this solution of this one scenario, which, the guy sitting next to me is like, now I'm not so sure about this one. And now the director of logistics is like, no, this one makes sense. I've thought about this, and, I think this is a good idea. So now the script has flipped a little bit. And the line that I will never forget was, after a few minutes of back and forth, the guy, the logistics director, says, but the model says so. And I'm like, up until this point, the things that you didn't agree with, it didn't matter that the model said so. The model was wrong. But now that the model aligns with what you believe, just quit arguing, man. The model says so, right? So it's just the most sort of incredible little flash in my mind is like, it doesn't really matter what the model says. What really matters is, what do people believe, right? That is what it fundamentally is. And then years later, I was in a training session, and Schneider did some great training classes. And this one was really around beliefs and change management, things like that. And there was a line in there that said, people don't act in accordance with the truth, which kind of got me like, really? And so people act in accordance with the truth as they believe it to be, which only reinforced this idea that I always thought I was in the business of bringing data to the table, and the data was quote unquote the truth, right? As once you got through all the data crap you had to figure out, but finally we got to the truth, and this was the truth. Like, what else is there to do? But it's like, wait a minute, I'm really not in the truth delivery business. I'm more in the belief changing business, because assuming I can get to a truth that I feel good about mathematically, that's where that going back to going the extra mile. I'm really in the belief changing business. Like, how do I get this person to believe that this is in some way, shape better than what their beliefs are today? And that's a very, very tough thing to do.
But it's also just in fairness, I think you're, in business, because you said at the beginning, I thought you framed it well. It's like politics have a very negative connotation, but at its highest level, it's about compromise and trying to figure things out. And I think what you're suggesting too is that, part of what you're doing is presenting a different kind of set of data to sort of maybe point the organization in a better direction, but not necessarily getting away from the truth, but just trying to sort of get someone to believe a new set of data that might be more accurate or lead to some benefits, right?
Thank you for bringing that up. This is not about getting away from the truth, right? So this is not about like washing it in a different way, blah, blah, blah. That's not it at all. I 100% agree with you. But where I would put a slight caveat on that is, it may not actually be more data. It may be something very different, right? I've got more traction out of presenting solutions to people once they have gotten to know me and trust me on things like that. And that's one of the things I often try to do, is I just want to solve any problem. It doesn't matter. I did a lot of work in dispatch, and the drivers with quote unquote the guys that this was being done to, right, at the end of the day. So at one point in time, I don't have a certificate or anything of this, but I believe I had the most windshield time for anybody at Schneider, especially the technology group, just riding along with drivers, clearly in the technology group, right? And I would just go out and hang out with these guys and understand kind of some of them kind of knew my role, some of them just knew I was some corporate guy, so they'd tell me, the optimization sucks, and not knowing that, this delivered by my group, but at least I was getting honest feedback. So this one guy I'm driving along with, just explaining things to me, and we get to this the ramp in Worcester, Massachusetts, which had gone through a large reconstruction project over the last few years, and he's just like out of the blue said, I don't know if you can help with this, but we don't use the GPS really because we know the ramp, but there's new drivers. It's really helpful for that. I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, but with this reconstruction, they've changed the main entrance from, well, I forget what it was, like Elm Street to Main Street. But the GPS still has drivers going to Elm Street because that hasn't been updated. Can somebody fix that? I was like, I assume so. I have no idea. So, in the truck, I'm on the phone with somebody I know back in Green Bay. I was like, hey, who does that? Who does our geofencing? And talk to, Sue and blah, blah, blah. Like, okay. So I got reconnected with somebody and I talked to that person. And eventually that person's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm here. You're sitting in Green Bay. She's like, okay, yeah, I'll get that fixed. That's great. Never thought about it, right? 2 or 3 months later, that guy's boss, who's the ramp operations manager, great guy, busts his butt every day to take care of his drivers. Comes in, we're having lunch together, some corporate meeting thing. It's like, you're a jerk. I'm like, what was I do? It's like, I bust my butt every day taking care of these guys, and there was this one problem. And remember that driver you rode around with? I'm like, yeah, I think so. It's like, yeah. He's like, hey, why don't you call that guy in Green Bay? He's pretty smart. He helped me out. Maybe he can help you out, right? So that problem got fixed. I didn't even know it got fixed, right? It had nothing. I mean, yeah, tangentially it's connected to the optimization, but it wasn't fundamentally about the optimization. But I fixed a problem for this guy, and now this guy trusts me, right? So the next time I go and talk to him and I say, hey, this route that you think isn't the best idea, but it actually is because the optimization does this, this, and this. So we're not changing the truth, right? It is the truth. But now he's so much more willing to listen to what I have to say, because he knows he can sort of like, yeah, this guy's helped me out in the past, so why would he be lying to me? Or, so it's not necessarily about bringing more data into the specific example. It's more about creating a foundation for that conversation to happen so that you can get past some of the, I don't really understand why this optimization solution is better, but I know Vijay. Vijay's a good guy. I trust Vijay. That's why I'm going to do it, not because the math is right.
And I think that there's something fairly deep in this that if we don't have any other great takeaways from today, I think this is a massive one for our audience. Every decision support, decision intelligence technology that comes in the organization is a Trojan horse for a way of managing and behaving with the decisions you have to make. And a way of thinking about those decisions somewhat differently as a consequence of the data/technology we're giving you. And we jump right to behavior change. And I think the big takeaway from this first half of Zahir's podcast is sometimes you can't get to behavior change if you don't go through belief change.
I 100% agree. In fact, behaviors do not change unless beliefs change. It's all, and I'm not an expert in psychology, but I spend a lot of time now listening to podcasts on psychology. So I'll put a pitch in for one of my favorite podcasts is Hidden Brain. I get so much out of Hidden Brain, and they're not talking about analytics, but I can sort of say, oh, this could work. Ooh, this could work. So I don't think, honestly, sustainable change, right, has to come from a change in beliefs. Otherwise, I don't think it can stick.
I was gonna kind of riff off of your idea of your story you tell about sort of helping the guy out, because I feel like when I read your article, it popped in my mind. There's this difference between the long and the short game of politics. Like the short game of politics is like, let's win this particular issue. And when I read you, I hope readers don't come away with that, and they come away with like, there's this long game where I have to do all these little things, the extra mile. I think you phrased it really well. That if I play this long game, I'm going to lose some of the short ones. Like someone's just not going to implement my system. They're not going to believe me. But if I'm playing that long game of trying to tell the truth, trying to help the organization, it's going to benefit me. Can you comment on that a little bit? Like how you think of the long game and short game, or what you think of that?
Yeah. So again, I came to work every day really wanting to help, do the right thing, and I thought I was doing it by bringing my skills and talents to the table, which is working with data and writing code, whatever that might be, right? And here's another story that sort of sticks very deeply in my mind. I was trying to present some of this capability to a new VP, and I had 30 minutes and probably had more slides than I could to cover in 30 minutes, all this cool stuff that my team could do. And so it was sort of an internal selling meeting, if you will. And he was on the phone, but he called me and said, yeah, sit down, I'll be off in, one of those classic, I'll be off in 2 minutes. Right. I'm sitting in his office and 2 minutes turns to 5 to 10, right? Like, okay, now I've got 20 minutes to cover 40 minutes of slides. So I'm just sitting there looking like, okay, what do you do when you're in some senior leader's office, right? Like, oh, what books is this guy reading? So I'm looking at the books. And then he had I think it was like a bumper sticker, right? And I think it's a Roosevelt quote. It says, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And it's an old quote about applied to so many different things. And that, I don't know what books were on the shelf, but that's the thing that stuck in my mind. I'm like, I care a lot, but I don't know if people know how much I care. And I seem to show all my caring through spreadsheets and data and graphs and analysis. Do they fundamentally know that I care about the same things that they care about? I don't think so, because we never talk about that. I think that's sort of the key thing that I try to get to with people is an understanding of like, what is that joint thing that we care about? And then how do we think about, how can I present this to them in a way that would make sense and say, okay, yeah. This meets that common goal that we're trying to achieve.
I want to riff on this idea of common goals. How often, and I was listening to you talk about the Snyder, the drivers versus the corporate types as a kind of a paradigm. How often do you feel that there's a perception that the goals are not aligned between what the company wants from a technology and behavior change and what the individual sees as their role or sees as their point of pride or identity?
Quite often, and I'll answer that with 2 points. One is this idea of culture, and another one of my favorite quotes is a Drucker quote, but it says that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes.
Right? And what I love about that quote is I kind of knew that based on my experience, right? I'd come to the table with a solution, and for some reason people wouldn't accept it, and there was something there that I couldn't quite understand, and I'll just put it under this broad umbrella of culture. And when you say like, what is culture? And one of the best definitions I've had of culture is sort of, it's an invisible force, right? It's like gravity. I know it's there, so just be aware that it's there, and you're going to step off a ledge, right? And if you don't think that gravity's not there, you're going to get hurt, right? So I try to understand like, what is the culture within that group, that team, that section that we're working with, where this would fit with the culture, because you can change the culture. I'm not saying that's impossible, but that's a heavier lift, and you got to decide where you want to go after it. If I can come up with something that fits the culture, that's a much easier lift, because it's kind of already fitting beliefs that already exist. Now, when you say culture, there are definitely things that are sort of espoused, like on mission statements, vision statements, things like that. That's good to know, but that's not the culture I'm talking about. I'm talking about like trying to understand sort of the on the ground culture, like people will say, yeah, but Sue's been there for 20 years and Sue really knows how this works, right? So if Sue understands and Sue's with you, then you got that's sort of a version of culture, right? You've got an internal person who really gets it, and everybody respects her. So if you can work with Sue and get Sue to believe, share Sue's beliefs and she shares yours, then you got a better chance across the group. So, that's the one side. The other side of it is, and I see this quite often, and it's an interesting dilemma. So one of the ideas is, hey, if you're going to present a solution, present it in a way that people are already used to seeing, right? Because it makes it so much easier, right? So yeah, if you can do that, that's great. However, a lot of the solutions, especially in the world of optimization, a lot of the solutions that came before the optimization existed because you didn't have an optimization, right?
Right.
So the metrics that are put in place, the procedures, the processes that are put in place because the optimization didn't exist. So we had this example where we had dispatchers in Chicago. Chicago is a big market. You don't have an optimization. What are you going to do? You're going to divide and conquer, right? Okay, Vijay, you do regional drivers. These are the guys that go out longer, stay overnight. Michael, you take local drivers that are going back and forth, in a given day. And Zahir, you do cross towns because cross towns are the runs that go between rail ramps and so on and so forth, right? It's a very reasonable human way to divide the world. And of course, we sit next to each other, we talk, but that's the way the world is divided up, right? And then somebody comes along and drops in an optimization model that combines all of those into one.
Yeah.
Do you still then take the solution and break it out in 3 different ways? Don't know. That's not the point. The point is it's all combined now, right? So you have to fundamentally rethink how you structure the organization. That's one of the, I think, sort of most memorable things we did at Schneider back. I don't know if it's still there or not, but we changed the role of dispatcher to dispatch analyst because dispatchers identified their work as dispatching, right? And if you bring in a solution that now does a lot of the dispatching for me,
who am I?
Now I've got some cognitive dissonance here. Like, what am I doing here then if this is doing that? Now, I fully well know that the optimization is not good enough to do it all and do it all perfectly, right? I definitely need a human in the loop to make sure that it's working, right? The data quite often is not correct. Somebody only notices that, a human notices that, and then goes and does what needs to happen. Systems go down, it's a highly integrated system. Some portion of the system goes down. Somebody has to now manually step in and take care of some steps. So the dispatch analysts definitely knew how to dispatch, but their role was defined differently. Their role was defined to analyze the solution, right? And they only intervened when there was a clear, hard constraint type of violation, right? The data was wrong, right? But if they saw a solution, I was like, I wouldn't have done that, but it doesn't violate anything. No major constraint is violated. Okay, I'm good. I'm just going to sit on my hands and let it roll, right? Now, you have to give that person a lifeline there too, because then if something went wrong as a result of that, they shouldn't be held responsible for that. So then I was like, yeah, then you blame me, right? So if your boss's boss's boss says, why the hell did you do that dispatch? Like, hey, this is what the optimization came up with. And Zahir told me if that happens, I should let it flow. There was really fundamentally nothing wrong with it, right? The drivers were available, the trucks were available, everything was available, so there was nothing wrong with it. So this one, you got to ask Zahir, right? That's on him. That's not on me. So at least there's a fairness there where people are not feeling like they're held accountable for something that they can't control. And I'm totally willing to take accountability for the stuff that my team's building out. So therefore, there's something there. And hey, maybe there was a bug. We found something, some edge case. Great, right? Sorry that happened. Let's fix it. Let's move on, right? But at least it allowed the system to continue to run and do its thing. Versus having a dispatcher continually jumping in there and go, no, that's not what I would do. Let's swap this around. Let's swap this around. And then it just has sort of this cascading effect, and every time the solution updates every 15 minutes and so on and so forth. So, changing things that you have to, I think, sometimes reimagine what the approach should be just because the technology that you're bringing to the solution never existed before. Therefore, all the processes and metrics and stuff are designed sort of in an old way versus in a different way that you have to think about it.
How long did that take? How long did that change management take? Was that a 2-week change of titles? 10 months?
Yeah, closer to the 10 months. I forget exactly. It was many, many years ago now. But yeah, it would be closer to the 10 months. I mean, HR had to get involved, right? People had to kind of re-interview, right? Now, the good news was that there were some dispatchers that were super good with the drivers, and our driver to leader ratio was getting a little tight. So we could move those folks to manage drivers, right? Okay. And they knew how the optimization worked, right? So then they were helping drivers saying, guys, you got to update this, right? I need your ETAs better. I need your time availability. You're not doing it. Oh, you're the new guy. Gotcha. Let me teach, So it worked out well in that sense. But we went to a smaller set of dispatchers and more driver leaders, so that improved that driver leader ratio. And yeah, I'm guessing it took probably 10 months.
So it's a question for both of you guys, riffing off Zahir's last response. And Mike, I'd love to get your take on it as well. What we just talked about feels like what Zahir just talked about is we've brought an intelligent technology in. It's required a role to be redefined and some identities to be reset. With Gen AI, we're going to see a lot of that kind of thing. Thoughts from you guys on how management can facilitate those types of changes?
Oh, sure. You ask us this question, you get a pass on answering it?
I've got thoughts as well, but that's the benefit of having jumped first on the buzzer.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, what do you think? I'd be really interested to hear.
I don't know. So I had a fun conversation in a master's level class. So these people, some people have work experience or working, and we're talking about Gen AI. This is kind of the topic of the course. And what was interesting. I kind of posed a question to the class: is that are you worried that your degree is going to be worthless? Because Gen AI knows so much of this stuff. And their resounding answer was like, for sure, they're worried. Like, this is like something fundamental is changing. So, to answer your question, Vijay, of like, what should managers expect is like, I think we should expect it's going to be awfully strange and awfully weird. Like how and there's going to be a lot of change. Like some basic questions can get answered easily. It's still, a technology that's not perfect. And so that we will have to change it. But I think it's my kind of advice is just, I don't know like a step 1 and step 2 to do, but I do know it's going to be really weird and really strange as all kinds of organizations change. Kind of fun. Like education probably feels to me like one of the big ones. It's going to, like how we educate people and how we assess people is really going to change quite a bit. And I don't know the answer for like what the end state's going to look like. So there's my non-answer.
No, I think that's a pretty good insight, right? Which is that if management doesn't deal with it, the anxiety level could just sort of torpedo the potential value because people are anxious. That's a really useful insight.
So here's my sort of long-term view on this, right? Every technology at some level ended up replacing something, right? When I was going through grad school, robots were going to run every manufacturing line everywhere and nobody would ever work in a factory again, right? That was 30 years ago-ish. And there's a lot of robots in factories, but there's still people in factories.
Yep.
So I sort of take this long view. I 100% agree with Mike that it's going to change a lot, but it rarely is something that is so complete, right? Where every job is now going to be replaced with an AI agent and there'll be nobody working in the office. So I don't subscribe to that kind of view. But at the same point in time, I'm not saying, therefore, nothing's going to change. It's all the same. The thing that is the same is that this stuff just happens over and over again. What I find interesting is that for people that worked in technologies, even like us, that presented dispatch optimization solutions, that did take jobs away, right? We didn't need as many dispatchers as once we put in the optimization. So now the guys that wrote those programs have AI writing programs, right? And now those jobs are being affected and they're like, whoa, this is going to be, I'm like, it's kind of karma, guys. I mean, this is what happens when technology does things, right, that people used to be able to do. I think the challenge is going to be the challenge we've always had as, I guess, a human race, is to kind of figure out where this fits, where it fits well, when it's appropriate to use, right, where it's not appropriate to use, and then integrating it and managing that change then for people, because, yeah, there will be people that will resist it for whatever reason. I think AI writes incredible code. I've been able to do so many cool things with AI in terms of just, being able to write code with it. But then it also does some very, very stupid things in some other areas, which over time I'm sure will get better. But maybe it'll sort of settle into some steady state where it'll be really good at writing code, but not really good at, deep reasoning or something like that, unless you have, gobs and gobs of money to invest in it. So for most people, the reasoning jobs may still be there with some assistance from AI. The code writing I think you'll need less people writing code because you could just write so much more code faster with the people you have. And it'll be interesting for sure to see kind of how it develops. So we should do this podcast again in 10 years and see.
Exactly.
Well, I'll give you guys my comments and then I'll throw it over to Mike for our closing question. My fundamental belief is that we're going to have to get used to the dynamic nature of roles and assignments, and that currency is going to be our ability to learn and our ability to, as we're part of a new initiative like this, learn as much as we can and figure out where we can add more value outside of the identity and the role that we'd had before that we were potentially attached to. And I think that a lot of this is going to fall on management, senior management, to essentially either honestly say, this is the mission of the team, help us figure out how to do better, help us figure out how to execute to create more value, or to be honest and say, look, this is a headcount reduction thing. There are going to be other opportunities. We don't know what they look like yet. Because in the absence of clarity from leadership, people are going to assume the worst.
That is so true.
All right. So last questions here. We'll turn it. You already gave us a Hidden Brain as a good podcast to listen to. You have any other podcast, book, article recommendations for the audience?
The other podcast that I listen to as regularly as I can is Planet Money.
Yeah, perfect.
So I think it's a good one from a economics perspective, where they go in a lot of interesting directions with that. So I really enjoy Planet Money. And like I said, I'm more a podcast guy. So those would be my two go-tos. And then, of course, every once in a while I come across something and I listen to it and I hear Mike Watson's voice on the radio. Well, that's a whole different story.
Right, exactly.
All right, on that note, Zahir Balaporia, thanks so much for joining us on the Decision Intelligence Lab podcast. Thanks to those that are listening. If you like what you hear, please share it, like it online, and listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to subscribe, send us an email at the decisionintelligencepodcast@gmail.com. And if you've got an idea of something that you think our audience would be interested in, send us an email and give us your thoughts. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.